So formally, let me welcome you. I know some of you have been here for about 5 minutes, and that's wonderful. I saw Gambia in the chat, and I apologize, I'm multitasking here. I don't see everyone who's from around the world in the chat, but I'm sure the advisors will welcome you and write where they're from. So thank you for that. This event is supported by live simultaneous translation in French, should that be your preferred language. And you can find that icon on the bottom of your screen. It looks like a globe. So we welcome you to use that as you need to. Just so you know, we will be having breakout rooms, and unfortunately, the technology is such that within that context of the breakout rooms, the French translation won't be there, but everything in the main hall will be. So thank you for that patience. So we're here to really talk about and celebrate International Development Week. And I would really like to recognize and thank Cuso's Youth Engagement Advisors for curating and producing this event. As we mark IDW, which is often referred to, we reflect on how far we've come, how connected we are, and how the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations 2030 Agenda can guide us to resilient, inclusive, and sustainable recovery as we are, navigating our way out of this COVID-19 pandemic. IDW celebrates the people of Canada working in support of international development from coast to coast to coast. And we really are looking to shine a spotlight on the important contributions around the world. So with that, and in respect, I would like to now turn things over to Gurneet to do a land acknowledgement from where she is. Gurneet, over to you.
Thank you, Tina. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm speaking to you from Toronto, and it is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we are respectful and grateful to be able to live and work on this land. Land acknowledgements are a small step, but an important one towards reconciliation, and allows us the opportunity to reflect and stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples. At this time, we invite you to write in the chat the traditional territory you are joining us from. I would also like to bring your attention to the image you see on the screen by artist Alan Syllaboy. The round dance drum is more important now than ever. The dancers join hands to form a large circle, symbolically indicating the equality of all people in the world, showing us that together we are stronger. Over to you, Aryeh.
Awesome, thanks so much for that, Gurneet. So I'm just gonna do some quick housekeeping. So we just wanna let everyone know that you should feel free to share comments and reflections by using the chat box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. We welcome your engagement. At this time, we would also like to remind you that we do have a code of conduct, so please do refrain from using language that could be demeaning or discriminatory. Harassment of any kind will not be tolerated. Please do not disrupt this virtual meeting. If you have a comment, it can be left in the chat box. I invite you to join in the conversation on social media using the following hashtags to amplify the conversation that we have today. Hashtag IDW2022, hashtag Go for the Goals, hashtag Cuso International. I also wanted to share with you that we will invite you to participate in an online quiz as well as a Mentimeter poll later on. If this poses a barrier of any kind, please don't hesitate to let us know. I want to reinforce that this event was curated by the Cuso International Youth Engagement Advisory in partnership with Global Affairs Canada. Thank you so much and enjoy the panel.
Hello everyone, I am Minister Harjit Sajjan, and this week is International Development Week. International Development Week is an opportunity to mark Canada's contributions through our feminist international assistance policy towards building a more peaceful, inclusive, and prosperous world for everyone. Now, over the course of this week, hundreds of activities across the country will shine a spotlight on Canada's contributions to international development around the world. share our stories, and reaffirm our commitment to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It's also a time to thank you, the individuals and partner organizations who work tirelessly 365 days a year on making these goals a reality. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact everyone around the world, it is clear that the global challenges are also Canada's challenges. We know that our greatest resource is us. Each of us, from coast to coast to coast, and from all walks of life, have an opportunity to get involved in the international effort to build better lives around the world. Canada's efforts toward achieving gender equality, a greener planet, and equal access to education and healthcare are transforming lives in some of the most challenging areas of the globe. So let's keep going. Let's keep working. Let's encourage others to join us. Let's continue to go for the goals together. Hello.
Let me unmute myself. How many times have we said that in the virtual world? So thank you to Global Affairs Canada. They are a funder of Cuso International and the work that we do, and they are a funder of this event. So with that, I would like to formally introduce the members very quickly. I know that they did some introductions, but not all of you were in the room at that particular time. So a little bit about our organization for those of you who might be unfamiliar. Cuso International is a Canadian INGO, non-for-profit organization, and our focus is really around Sustainable Development Goal number 1, ending poverty and inequality. We work on today's most important development issues, and you'll hear some of them tonight throughout the panel discussion, where communities in need, and we do that with skills that create lasting change. We work towards empowerment, education, and an enabling environment. Our skilled volunteers and staff work with hundreds of local partners around the world. They enrich the lives of women and girls. They're working towards improving economic opportunities for marginalized communities. And with that, so are our change makers. So let me just go with number 1. Let me start off with Yara. She is passionate about goal number 3, which is health and well-being, and goal 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Yara joined Cuso's advisory to develop strategies for public action on Cuso's fundraising projects and to use her platform to support diversity of underrepresented people and opinions. Yara volunteered to be the project manager of tonight's event, and she will be moderating the fireside chat coming up shortly. Our next changemaker with a positive attitude and smile is Cass, who is currently attending the University of Toronto as a 4th-year undergraduate student, majoring in biology and public health. Her interest and passion is to pursue a career related to global health, which is SDG 3. And Cass will be running the diversity and inclusion session that will be facilitated by Gurneet. Over to our changemaker, Abby. Abby is most passionate about global action and to reduce inequalities. She believes they are essential to resolve if we are to have a sustainable and centered development, community-centered development. Those are SDG 10 and SDG 13. Abby was an intern with Cuso, and you'll see Abby a little bit later as she interviews Cuso volunteer Stephanie Boyd. So get ready for some great storytelling about the Kokama people in Peru. Next, we have Ethan, who is passionate about goal number 4, quality education, and goal number 8, decent work and well-being. Ethan believes having inclusive and equitable education, as well as opportunities for decent work, is our greatest weapon to end poverty and inequalities. Ethan has been generous in teaching me a little of the Mi'kmaq language. So Wellalin, which is thank you, Ethan, for your generosity. Aryeh, which you just heard, is passionate about goal 8, decent work and economic growth, as well as goal 13, climate action. A lot of young people and climate action align. She is interested in the long-term approach that Cuso is taking when looking at development issues. She believes that going forward, this is the only sustainable way to look at issues within the sector. Aryeh managed the public relations for this event, and she will be running the quiz game session a little later on. Now, Gurneet. Gurneet is interested in social determinants of health, health innovation, and the intersection of gender and health, which are SDG 3 and SDG 5. Gurneet was the graphic designer of all of our promotional posters and materials and is a strong contributor to all the ideas shared in this event. I just want to say publicly to all of the C members that it's been a pleasure working with you for these past few months. You're all big change makers on the advisory board, and I look forward to our big ideas coming up in the future. So with that, I would like to turn things over to Yara for the moderation of the panel discussion. Over to you, Yara.
Hi, everyone. So let's get into our panel discussion. So first, let me introduce our wonderful guest speakers. Our first guest speaker is Chris Honani from the Hopi and Dene Nations, all the way from Arizona. He is the Food Sovereignty Program co-coordinator with the International Indian Treaty Council, and his background is rooted in traditional Hopi dryland agriculture. Our second speaker is Ethan Paul, who you also know as one of the hosts of tonight's event. He's from the Member 2 First Nation in Unamaki in Nova Scotia, and he will be sharing Mi'kmaq knowledge. But before we begin the panel, I'd like to share a short video on why Indigenous peoples are so critical to the achievement of the global goals.
And we are affected by all the goals, from reducing poverty to the issue of economic growth to the issue of women's empowerment.
And the Sustainable Development Goal is very much related, and it's very much important for us to reduce the inequalities that Indigenous people, including persons with disabilities, are facing. That the whole Sustainable Development Goal should be focused that no one will be left behind, and it's also that nothing about us without us.
One of the sustainable goals for our tribal community that the United Nations supports is global education. Education, period, is very important to Indigenous people. But for us, implementing and finding new strategies and mechanisms to use as education by using our culture can help to sustain global peace and conflict resolution.
But the access to education for Indigenous peoples, not just access to the appropriate and culturally relevant education in the public system, but also access to Indigenous education.
Necesitamos un desarrollo integral, ya que contamos con mucha desnutrición. La salud de la mujer, la educación de la mujer está descuidada por ser mujer indígena y por ser mujer pobre.
Achieving equality is very important to address the issue of discrimination and marginalization, but also in terms of recognizing the contributions of Indigenous peoples in sustainable development.
From the Indigenous perspective, the Indigenous world, I would certainly take a look at good health and well-being. It is really the essence of being connected to your lands, languages, your culture, physical well-being, the emotional well-being, the spiritual well-being.
Los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible son muy importantes en el sentido de que representan un marco general para que los gobiernos, conjuntamente con todas las instituciones de la iniciativa privada y todos los actores de sociedad civil, puedan implementar programas y proyectos en beneficio de las poblaciones indígenas, particularmente para luchar contra la pobreza, las desigualdades y las injusticias.
Entonces queremos hablar al mundo para que nuestra gente no sea juzgada y que tengamos los derechos que toda persona necesita tener.
And with that, we'll stop the screen share and have a panel discussion. And once again, this is a participatory event, so please get your questions ready. Do them in the chat while the moderation is going on, and Yara will facilitate a Q&A shortly afterwards. So thank you.
Yeah, any questions you have, feel free to put them in the chat. So let's jump into the panel discussion. So first of all, I'd just like to ask Chris and Ethan, where did you get most of your knowledge? Like, why do you know about Indigenous knowledge?
Yeah, I could go first. So I say I learned most stuff from my family, especially my grandparents. But like this past year, I've been working at the Heritage Park and Community, and I learned a lot more about like our culture and stuff there this past year.
And Chris?
And for me, I learned much of my knowledge also through my grandparents and also both of my parents as well. But I would say mainly from my grandparents because they grew up speaking fluently in Hopi. But my parents actually, they weren't really able to learn how to speak fluently. And so they realized that that's something that they don't want to happen to their kids. So for me, I started to learn the language at an early age. And so they also really pushed me to learn the things that they weren't able to learn growing up. So that's kind of where I learned a lot of my knowledge.
Okay, so with that knowledge, let's talk about the global goals or the SDGs. Chris, how do you think Hopi knowledge can support the achievement of those goals?
Well, Hopi knowledge really is very complex. It's a knowledge that has been time tested for thousands of years, and really, it's a set of rules that we live by that I believe can be applied to everybody else's everyday lives, so that they're able to help achieve the global goals. And some of those rules are to be respectful of people around you. Don't always think about yourself. You always have to think about the people that live next to you, but not only them, but the people that might live on the other side of the world as you. Many of our ceremonies, the purpose isn't just to benefit our people, it's to benefit the entire world. And so really, you have to consider everybody. You can't just consider yourself and your family, because that's being selfish. You have to be respectful of people that you don't know and people that you may not ever come across in your life, but just know that you're not the only person living in this world. And so to be mindful of everybody around you and be mindful of the animals and the plants and everything else that's living. Just because you might not be able to talk to it doesn't mean that that you're more intelligent than that living being. So just keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. And I think also with like the global goals is we don't want to achieve them in silos or work towards them in silos. We always have to be considerate of how everything affects everything else, because we don't want to achieve like SDG 3 at the expense of another one. So Ethan, I'll extend that same question to you, is how does Mi'kmaq knowledge support the global goals?
Yeah, so right now I say like a lot of Mi'kmaq, they're working towards the SDGs right now by themselves. Like, so for education, for instance, like about 20 years ago, only 30% of the Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq were graduating from high school. And today we're actually at one of the highest on-reserve graduation rates in Canada at 90%. And that's accredited to the creation of the Mi'kmaq Education Authority. Right now, the national average is only about like 48%, I think. And also right now we're starting to see like the creation of Indigenous protected conservation areas and organizations like the Atlantic First Nation Water Authority. And with those, they recently signed like a deal with the federal government to take over control for various like First Nation communities in Atlantic Canada for drinking and wastewater. And like one of their goals I found really interesting was like that one of their goals is for the Minister of Indigenous Services to be out of a job, for that position to no longer be needed. So right now, Indigenous communities that have control over their own resources and their futures, that's where we see that success. And for Canada, supporting Indigenous sovereignty that's how they're going to be working towards the global goals.
So with the education and the graduation rates,
yeah,
the Mi'kmaq graduation rates are over double the standard general Canadian high school population. So what did they do that went from 30% to 90% graduation?
Yeah, so I think a big part of it is just because they created their own schools, they're able to teach like that cultural knowledge and history in that course that you wouldn't get on going schools officer really.
Mm. Do you
And
think
people from
someone,
and people from the community are actually also working in there. So that community aspect of like is in the schools too.
so it's more like personal, like
Yeah.
you really get the sense that your teachers are your community members and they really care about you.
Yeah. Yeah, like when I went to school, a lot of my teachers were my cousins. So
Oh, really?
yeah.
Do you think some of that, like, couldn't that be applied to just Canadian high schools in general?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move. Oh,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, yeah. So yeah, so I would say like a lot of the stuff it'd benefit like the general Canadian public for learning some of the stuff that we learn, like the cultural knowledge and stuff that you don't really get in other schools.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's move into kind of a similar topic about community challenges. So Chris, what do you see as the biggest challenge that Hopi people are currently facing?
I kind of have a two-part answer to that. I kind of see two things as being the biggest challenges. Number one, being the decline in the number of language speakers, Hopi language speakers. The numbers are going down, but I have hope that through language immersion programs and people just taking the initiative to ask their grandparents or their parents how to speak the language, because the language really carries much of the identity, all of the identity of the people. And so without that language, we won't have our knowledge. We won't have our history. We won't have our stories. We won't have any of that if we don't have our language. The second part to that, the second challenge, I believe, is really hitting us hard is droughts. We have been basically living in a state of drought for over 20 years, basically almost a constant state of drought. And really, we really pride ourselves on growing corn, blue corn, white corn, yellow corn, red corn, all different types of corn. And our corn is very unique because it grows with very little rainwater. It's already used to growing in drought conditions. It's a really drought resistant crop. But the conditions that we're seeing today are really pushing our traditional crops to its limits. It's really testing the drought resiliency of our crops. And so, in our past, we've experienced drought before, but today we're experiencing drought that has been really increased by human causes. And so we really kind of did this to ourselves in a way. But with our corn, really, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, is basically our identity as a people. It tells a story of who we are and where we came from. And so if we were to ever lose our corn, we would also lose really one of our main identities as a people. And so I believe that drought is one of the most hardest challenges for us to overcome.
Mm-hmm. I was talking to Chris a few weeks ago about the traditional Hopi agricultural methods they use, and already they're quite sophisticated because he was sort of explaining that it requires no pesticides, no fertilizers, little to no machinery, and no irrigation or watering. And they're able to grow so many different varieties of crops corn, beans, even fruits in Arizona, like in the middle of the desert. It seems like something that, I don't know, I feel like other people might be able to use this. So Chris, would you like to expand upon that?
Yeah, and just to kind of explain a little bit more about kind of how unique our crops are, as Yara said, we have no surface water in our area. We basically don't even really have any trees in our area. It's a high desert region that receives less than 10 inches of rain a year. And so we really rely on the summer rains and also the winter snows to come and provide the moisture to the soil for our crops. But we're seeing years, year after year, where we could see heavy rains during the summer, and then the next year it would barely rain at all. And so really, it's really special to see the way that things have been grown in our area. And we're pretty isolated as well. We kind of were able to maintain much of our identity as an Indigenous people compared to many other Indigenous peoples around us. And so I grew up doing farming a lot with my family. And so many of the things that I learned out there were to be patient and just to be consistent with what you're doing and really care about the work that you're doing, because that energy that you're putting into the work of whatever you're doing, whatever you're trying to achieve, will eventually manifest itself into something positive. So you just always have to remember to do those things as well. But yeah, it's a very special, unique growing method that we have utilized for over thousands of years, and it's something that I will continue to push for other Indigenous youth to learn as well.
Yeah, it sounds like we need it now more than ever. So Ethan, I want to extend the same question to you, which is, what is the biggest challenge that Mi'kmaq people are facing?
Yeah, so I know one of the guiding principles of the SDGs is that no one is left behind and that the people who are the furthest behind shall be reached. And in Canada, most cases, that is Indigenous peoples. And so Mi'kmaq, when we start, like communities started launching their own livelihood fisheries, it contributed to, well, creating decent work and also reducing poverty and hunger in our communities. But at the same time, it was met with violence and resistance, and that was also due to like decades of government inaction and also like the government's unwillingness to work with Mi'kmaq communities. So as long as Canada doesn't respect Indigenous rights, they won't reach the global goals.
So then to ask, what would you like to see from the government?
Yeah, so some of the examples I showed before, like with the school, with education and the Indigenous protection conservation and the water authority, those are all like in partnership with the Canadian government. So those are some examples how they can work with Indigenous nations.
Okay, so let's move on to our third topic, which is youth. So to both panelists, I have the same question, which is, I'll start with Chris. What do you wish Canadian youth knew, or youth in general?
I would just like to kind of answer this a little bit more broadly, since I can't really relate too much to Canadian youth because I live here in Arizona. And so, but if I were to have a message for them, I would just say to just to know that we have a seat at the table when it comes to advocating for our peoples at the international level, but also regional, local levels as well. I've participated in many different international policy-making bodies and also attending several UN conventions, most recently the UN Climate Change Conference in Scotland last year. And I had the opportunity to be able to share my thoughts to several countries and to explain to them why Indigenous peoples should be consulted first. We should be the main people being listened to, but also being respected as well, because Indigenous peoples really were facing most of the consequences of climate change. And so I would want, Indigenous youth just in general, that we have that opportunity to go and to influence policies. We have the ability to do that, but it's up to us to take that step, to not be scared, to step out of your comfort zone. Growing up, I really was a very introverted, shy person. I would not like to talk in front of people. I don't like to speak in front of people. But once you start doing it, you'll eventually realize that many people want to hear your voice. Many people want to hear your perspective. And much of the time we think that, just because we're young, we're not going to be taken seriously. And that's true some of the time. But it's up to us to continue to speak up. Otherwise, we're never going to be heard. We're always going to be left behind, and we're always going to be the least thought of. And so it's up to us to be able to speak up for ourselves, and don't think that it's something that we shouldn't be doing, because we need to be doing this right now. And also just to learn, learn your language. Remember to learn your traditional languages, learn your stories, learn your history. That way, when you're speaking in front of a group of people, non-Indigenous people, you know what you're talking about. You're not just rambling on and making up stuff, because then you're going to realize that you don't really believe in yourself, because you've been telling lies the whole time. So it's really, you have to build your foundation up, but also step out of your comfort zone from time to time.
Yeah, that reminds me of this quote. I forget who said it, but you give up your power when you believe you have none. So if you think there's nothing you can do, like, that's really where you're at. You've already given up in a sense. So Ethan, anything you would like Canadian youth to know?
Yeah, so we have a term called, it's like Nedigalimk. So what it is, it's kind of like a Mi'kmaq natural law. And it's how we guide, what guides our beliefs and how we govern ourselves. And a key part of that is called Msit Nogama. So it's all our relations. So everything is interconnected, that what we do to the environment or to wildlife, it will affect us. And like, this is not really a new concept. It's cultures around the world share it, but it's we're kind of like straying away from it a bit. So I think youth have to start thinking, like, what am I doing? How is that going to affect future generations? And like, will they have the same access to resources that we have today, and hopefully even better access?
Mm-hmm. And it also has to do with like laws that the government, like the way that the common law system is built, is these laws don't only affect our societies today, but they set the precedent for what types of actions the government will do 20 years from now, 30 years from now, as long as the government is around. Okay, so I want to get to Nyla's, I hope I pronounced that correctly, her question that she put a few minutes ago. She says, what can the SDGs learn from Indigenous people? So if I'm interpreting that correctly, and you can jump in and tell me if this isn't the right way to interpret it, how can we adjust our understanding of the SDGs based on Indigenous knowledge?
Yeah, so I'm just going to mute myself to explain. No, it was just a comment that about how the SDGs are kind of going into communities and are supposed to be the framework. My question was that, just to give the context, that there's many Indigenous people that already have that great relation with their land, and when because of the ways that they've lived in conjunction with the land, that the SDGs are not necessarily like a guideline for them. It's more of, that's what they've been doing for so long. So what can the SDGs actually put in, like the UN or whoever, the people who have made the structure of the SDGs, what can they do to integrate what's already been here, that's been working for so long, into the SDGs so they're actually more effective? Especially when Ethan was mentioning about how, was it, I think it was you, Ethan, I'm not necessarily remember who it was, talking about how cultural specific schooling is what allowed a lot of youth to have quality education, and also to graduate by a significant amount versus what it used to be. Just to say that there's so much that's already within the culture. What can we put in these SDGs when they go to different nations, different countries? What can the SDGs learn about the people that can then adjust and make the SDGs stronger and actually effective, if that makes sense?
Ethan, you have anything you want to say about that?
The question.
I have something that I can kind of respond to that. Whenever I see the SDGs, I always see numbers, and I see stats, and I see things that really Indigenous peoples don't really use to quantify things. I mean, we don't really, really necessarily count things or have numbers in mind of things. Things just tend to be more fluid, and things tend to be a little bit more abstract when it comes to quantifying something. And so that would be one way that the SDGs can kind of learn from Indigenous peoples, is that we're not concerned about how much money is going into somewhere or how much money is being transferred to somewhere else. Those quantities, these numbers really, to Indigenous peoples, I think to many Indigenous peoples, don't really mean anything. It's really more about the context behind those numbers is what really matters. And so taking that Western idea of giving value to things, giving a dollar amount to things, really doesn't help Indigenous peoples, because most of the time, our traditional economies, we never use like any real forms of currency. A lot of the times we traded, we bartered with each other, we used a more equal system of economy. And so I think really just thinking back to the ways that these things are being measured, Indigenous peoples measure things in an entirely different way than an economist would at a non-Indigenous university. And so that's just something to also keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, that reminds me of in cooking, like when you're a beginner, you start with your measuring cups and your measuring spoons. But as you get more experience and expertise, you can just pour the ingredients in, and you really understand how the ingredients work. And in real life, I think sometimes with SDGs, we can get so focused on hitting those like quantitative targets that we forget the big picture of, like, it doesn't really matter whether we hit the targets, it matters what's actually happening, like what is observable in real life. And so we shouldn't miss the big picture. Ethan, anything you want to add?
Yes, I agree with Chris. Like really in Mi'kmaq organizations, I don't really ever see them use the term SDGs. They're always using like their own Netagulim as their own principle.
Okay, so to Chris, William has put in the chat something that maybe you can help me decipher. 1949, the long hope of the Navajo Nation and the 3-day Red Deer Dance of harmony with nature and maintaining stories and dance and ceremony. Would you like to talk about that maybe?
To be honest, I don't really know what that is. And I'm not saying that that's something that's just made up, because I really haven't been able to learn much about the Navajo side that I come from. I primarily was raised as a Hopi and learned mainly Hopi things. And so I really don't have any knowledge on that, to be honest, and I don't want to pretend like I do. So that's just something that I have to say. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. You can't be expected to know everything. And yeah, so are there any other questions anyone wants to ask to our two panelists? I personally have a question that either can answer. When you look at the media representations of either your nation or just Indigenous communities in general, do you think that they're accurate? Are they misinformed? Are they not the whole picture?
Yeah, I'll go. So yeah, I see like a lot of it's really skewed, especially like when we had that like whole stuff with the livelihood fishery. You get like there's a lot of pieces they weren't like telling, they wasn't about the facts, it's more of like a hit piece, like they were critical articles that people are writing. And like a lot of them talked about the sustainability of the fishery when the science wasn't really showing that it was unsustainable.
I think sometimes, especially when you're competing with like these big transnational industries, it can feel like either or, like it can feel like you're maybe a competitor to the industry. And I think that may be the reason for some of the representations. Chris, do you have anything to add about that?
Can you repeat the question again?
Sure. So in the media, do you feel like the representations of Indigenous people, whether in general or your specific tribe or nation, is accurate or misinformed?
Well, really, I mean, in the first place, there's not really much media attention to first of all my people, and when there is, it's always something negative. It's always something about like recently over COVID, the pandemic, about how we've been hit the hardest and how we're losing our elders, and we're losing everything, and how poor we are and how pitiful we're living, and in some ways there's some truth behind those things that are being said, but you know, it's a lot easier to point out the negatives than it is the positives, and I think that just goes, you know, in general through whole media. It's just, you know, it's easier to find the negative things about something than the positive. So it's always usually something negative. And, you know, I feel bad about that because there's many positive things that are going on in our Indigenous communities. There's many positive stories and inspirational stories out there that just don't get told. And I think the reason for that is because you know, many Indigenous peoples are pretty humble about stuff like that. We're not going out bragging about doing these things. We're not going out and saying how good we're doing and how many people we're helping, because we're just focused on doing the actual work and not bragging about it. And so in some ways, you know, that's kind of our own fault. But, you know, I would hope that there would be more attention to those kinds of stories. Back home at Hopi, I know there's some youth-led projects where traditional seeds are being restored and being given out to families who may have lost their seeds. But it's just not getting the attention because people would much rather talk about the number of people that are dying and the number of people that don't have access to clean water or electricity or food and stuff like that. And so really it's in every way, the media just does not paint the real picture of Indigenous communities, and I don't know if it ever will. I think it will if Indigenous peoples were able to take a more a higher role in dictating what kind of information comes out of our communities. And so that's something that I also kind of want other Indigenous youth to know as well, is that we have the power to tell our stories instantly, using social media, using Zoom like we're doing today. Think about it, we wouldn't be able to do this not even 20 years ago. This is something that's entirely new, and it's something that's been thrown at us so quickly. And I think it's going to take a little bit time for us to be able to really realize how critical of a platform this is for us to be able to share what's going on in our communities and what's really happening. And I think over time, we'll start to be able to tell the real story about what's going on and what's happening. I think we're really, we're moving along, we're moving forward in that way. So I just hope that that's something that continues to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. So I want to say thank you to Chris and Ethan for being our panelists, and thank you for the audience for participating and listening in or asking a question. I would love if you put in the chat, like what was your key takeaway, or what was something new you learned. So now over to Abby to explain the next part of the show and how the breakout rooms will work.
Perfect. Thank you, Yara, and our amazing panel members, Chris and Ethan. I know we all greatly appreciated the insight you shared with us today. In a few moments, we will separate you all into breakout rooms to join our discussion, either on diversity, equity, and inclusion in connection to indigeneity, or on the river rights of the Kukama people. So in room 1, Kasthuri S will facilitate an open dialogue on fostering belonging among Indigenous communities. The session will be facilitated by Gurneet, Bhela. Or in room 2, you'll be able to join me for a conversational interview with Cuso International volunteer Stephanie Boyd about the river rights of the Kukama people in Peru. If you'll just give us a few minutes to organize into breakout rooms, you should be able to choose a breakout room through the drop-down menu. If you have any trouble, please let us know and we will help you out.
Thank you, Abby. So I've just opened up the breakout rooms. So people should be able to select, and I'll automatically put yourself and Stephanie, Cass, and Gurneet in their correct rooms. So go ahead, everyone. Well, we're going to get started for the second half of our programming. I hope everyone had a good time, and not sure if everyone is back yet. Let me just go to the gallery view. Oh, yeah, many of you are back. I wanted to acknowledge Victor, who's new to Canada and the country and is enjoying the conversation. So thank you for those remarks, Victor. And thank you to everybody who's made remarks in the chat. We do have a couple of minutes before we go on to the next fun part of a quiz to just share some reflections. Like, I don't know if the facilitators want to share or if anyone within the groups want to share. Please go ahead. Open your cameras, open your microphones as you wish, or you can put it in the chat. Any key takeaways? How is your group, Stephanie and Abby?
Yeah, I think something we were reflecting on at the very end that I thought was interesting was just the similarities that people across, or Indigenous people across the world are facing, and the ways their knowledge can be used to tackle these issues is so important, and something we really need to work on incorporating into future goals and future development discourse.
Thank you. Gurneet?
A lot of participants in our group shared some great insights, and I think that in terms of just reflecting on how to advance DEI and sort of the steps to take at an individual level. We really heard about the importance of the little actions that we can take, such as, just learning each other's names and where we come from, and forming a bond in that sense, but also, acknowledging our privilege, especially when we are in positions of leadership and where we're able to use our voice to raise awareness. So it's great to see both perspectives on that.
Thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else who is a participant who would like to make any remarks before we move on?
Yeah, I'd share real quick. I think my biggest takeaway from this event has been just trying to apply Indigenous knowledge and just ways of living to how we think about the SDGs, because especially I think that there's such a Western and Northern Hemisphere ideology around the SDGs. And so like Stephanie was talking about, the idea of what sustainability means to Indigenous people who have heard these ideas talked about so much, but they never actually get to see sustainability, on their lands and for their people. So I think that's something that I take that I just want to apply more to my idea in thinking of the SDGs and trying to understand how I have been biased by so much of the world and the way we speak about it.
Thank you, Connor. You're not the only one. We all have subconscious biases. So thank you for taking the time. Thank you for participating. Anyone else? Just keeping an eye on the time. Go ahead.
Real quick. I just really wanted to thank Ethan and Chris for sharing some of your knowledge, especially what I took away from the beginning when the panel was happening is that nobody can tell your story but yourselves. And if we don't step up as Indigenous people around the world and take room, take up space and take up room and tell our story as we know it and our reality, somebody else will do it for us, or they'll completely disregard that we should be included and we should be in it as well. So I really appreciate that panel. I think it was awesome to hear from you too.
So I'll count to 3 and then continue on if there's no other remarks. This is a pilot program that Cuso International is running with youth advisories and public engagement. So we haven't done our assessment yet, but that's coming up in March. And I invite you all to, maybe open the lens and maybe consider if you see the call out there for future events, but also future opportunities to participate. And with that, I'm so excited for this part because it was all delegated over to Aryeh. So Aryeh, you have the microphone and I'll just put up the little slide so people know what's happening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tina. So I have just put in the chat a link. If you click on the link, it'll take you to a website where you can enter the code that I'm about to share with you. I'm just going to share my screen.
Aryeh, you're muted actually.
I'm so sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So if there's anyone who's not being able to join, just let us know in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to get started with the quiz. All right, so we're gonna get started. Just to let you know, for some of the questions, there are multiple right answers. And you might not know all of the answers to all of the questions because it has to do with some of the breakout rooms. Obviously, don't stress too much. It's just a fun quiz. So I think everyone should be done the quiz. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to end it there if that's okay. And yeah, we can move on to the next part.
Thank you, Aryeh. I hope that was a little bit of fun questioning throughout the Oh, Faith.
I just want to
That's
say,
awesome.
yeah, Faith definitely got first place because the rest of us have actually taken the quiz before. So we're cheaters.
Congratulations, Faith. We'll have to remember that. Ping us afterwards. I'm sure we can. I have some piece by chocolate here that is a gift, but we need to coordinate addresses and things like that. So congratulations. So yeah, I'm going to share my screen again. And as we close out, I would like to acknowledge and thank Ethan for bringing this artist to our attention. So I would like to acknowledge Alan Syllaboy. He was born and raised in Truro, Nova Scotia. He is currently living in the Millbrook First Nations community. And he enjoys and his journey through his life with a demeanor of strength. And he journeys through his life with a demeanor of strength. Alan has built an ever-growing list of accomplishments throughout his lifetime. Although many people are most familiar with his beautiful and unique works of art that captivate and inspire us, here we just shared throughout our presentation a small portion of his meaningful contributions to the world of art. So I do invite you to visit Alan's website and to consider learning a bit more about his heritage and the work that he is doing. So this is a representation that I thought was fitting as it ties into Canada's international assistance policy, feminist international assistance policy, and aligns. We were talking about how there's that intersectionality and integration within the SDGs and indigeneity. So in the Mi'kmaq tradition, women are accorded the highest respect and regard, for they are the portals through which a spirit comes to earth. And so with that, I would like to hand things over to Yara for closing remarks, and then we'll have a closing video of Cuso International. So thank you all again. And you can stay on. We might end about 5 minutes early. I'd love for you to network with each other or with myself. And yeah, so stay on the line afterwards. Thank you. Over to you, Yara.
So I want to say that while the goals are ambitious, they reflect the scope of the global challenges that we're facing and give us at least targets to strive towards and a working agenda to achieve them. So through what we've learned today about Indigenous knowledge and human rights, I think they remain our roadmap to a better and brighter future. So thank you for coming for the International Development Week 2022. And thank you to Cuso International. Thank you to everyone who put on this event. Most importantly, thank you to everyone who came to this event. It really means a lot. And on behalf of Cuso International, we gratefully acknowledge this financial support of the Government of Canada through Global Affairs Canada, as well as the support of our many donors. So thank you all.
How do you build a brighter future? Is it something you grow with care? A movement you inspire? Or a life you protect? At Cuso International, we know that change starts with sharing what you know. That's why we've spent nearly 60 years connecting skilled professionals, volunteers, and local changemakers, so they can work together to overcome poverty and create opportunity. To make communities more resilient and give every child a healthy start in life. Join us and help create a brighter tomorrow, because we all have skills to share and futures to build.
So with that, Wala Liok, thank you, merci.